What is going on, all my haunted followers? I'd like to say hello to all my new subscribers. Guys, thank you for subscribing to my channel. If you're watching this video and you haven't done so yet, be so kind to like and subscribe. I upload videos every Friday. Guys, vampires. Vampires are a very interesting topic, something that I normally wouldn't dwell into, but, it interested me. It interested me if anyone actually had actual encounter with vampires. And although I only got 3 to 4 stories, I was deciding that I was only going to do 3 stories. These stories were interesting, and they're very long. That's why I did 3 stories. But these stories, they absolutely blew my mind. I can't believe that people actually had encounters with vampires. I don't know what vampires are, but we most certainly will find out. So as always, sit back and prepare to get scared. Vampires aren't real, right? Well, I'm gonna tell you that they most certainly are. Well, not like the Twilight or anything, but I truly believe they have powers and could very much drink blood to stay alive. I worked as a security guard many years ago, sometime in the early 90s. Now, security takes all walks of life, as you can have the most boring post, but sometimes you get slapped with some really good stuff. I was assigned to a local hospital. I worked the 23 to 0700 post. You'd think working overnight at the hospitals would be boring, yet the ER is jumping with calls, shootings, stabbings, overdoses, you name it. When night falls, the crazies come out. One night, I was sitting at my post and got a call from the head nurse that they had a patient that had to be monitored. This is typically due to self-harm or even drugs, or someone who is going to cause harm to others. The nurse informed me briefly that the male patient was acting oddly and was giving everyone an uneasy feeling. So I walked to the patient's room. Sitting in the chair is a 40-something-year-old male. At first, I thought it was another patient's family member. The patient was very well dressed. I mean, this guy had a nice suit on, blonde hair and a ponytail. I asked, "Excuse me, are you the family member?" The man just casually looks around and smiles. "I'm the only one here, mate." "Ah, okay. Sorry," I say. "How's your night going?" I ask. What should I tell ya?" Oh, nothing. They felt you just needed the company." Then they awkwardly laughed. He then stands up and starts to walk across the room. I slowly went to grab my taser. Now, he didn't even see this as his back was turned. "No need for that, mate." I'm thinking, what the hell? How did he see that? I just look at him and tell him I'm only protecting myself. We ended up talking for a bit, and I found his name was Anul, and that he had been in the US for only a few years. Something was just off about him, and this is the only way that I can describe it. Have you ever been around a wild animal, maybe at the zoo or in real life, and you know without hesitation that that animal could rip you apart with simple ease? This was the vibe, and that's the only way that I can explain it to you. I asked him, "Anul, could you please have a seat?" as he was pacing around the room. "Sure, mate." He then sits down in the chair and just stares at me. At this point, I don't know what to make of this guy. One of the nurses walked in and said, "Is everything okay?" I'm confused, so I bring her into the hall. I say, "What's the story on this guy?" She replies, "He checked himself in. He was just really giving bad vibes to the staff and waiting patients. We had to move him to this room." I just say, "I'll ask him." So I step back into the room. "Anul, why did you check yourself in? If you're not sick, why are you here?" He just looks at me and says, Bit of a headache, mate. I'm like, okay. Mind you, the phlebotomy room is right across from us. So I say, I'll be right back, Anul. He just nods and gives me this really creepy smile. I honestly don't know if anyone listening to my story will believe me, but I will tell it anyways. This happened to me several summers ago when I was visiting New Orleans. Now, New Orleans has its ghost stories, but it also has its fair share of voodoo and other paranormal stuff. I had traveled down there with a college roommate. We spent most of our week just exploring the city and most enjoying the nightlife. Now, before the story gets adult, I'm not for one night stands. But if it happens, it happens. And I wasn't looking for anything like that. Anyways, so we get to this bar one night. I believe it was a Thursday night. Now, and not entirely packed. We were just sitting back, taking a few shots, and I started to feel a little bit, well, tipsy. I don't like, or have I ever liked, feeling drunk. So we decided to order some food. We were just sitting there eating, and my friend Kendra says, "Hey, that guy keeps looking at you." I'm like, huh? So I turn, and sitting at the bar is this, well, very good looking gentleman. I would guess he was in his late 20s, tall, black slicked back hair, wearing a black bun-up with black jeans. He was very pale. Not in a horrible way, just very light skin, but it worked for him. I was honestly shocked that this guy was even looking at me. There was just something about him that was so confident. He walked over to our table and introduced himself. He had a very strange accent. It was almost British, but like trying to hide it. I can't explain it. He told his name was Ardul, a name I had never heard of before. The whole time I was just getting this vibe from him. I can't explain it. So I tell him, I'm Crystal, but everyone calls me Chris. He picks up my hand and kisses it and says, a beautiful name for a beautiful girl. Now, I'm not a 10, I will admit that, but I keep myself decent. I have never had anyone really approach me, so I was kind of shocked. He asked me if we were visiting and if we were having a good time. I responded, yes, I love the city. He said, it's very lovely, especially after dark. So I told him, yes, I love it. He then asked me, would you like to go for a walk? Now, at that moment, I had no bells or whistles or anything going off in my head. Again, there was just something about him. This vibe, like, I could walk with him and he would protect me. So I said, sure. My friend just looked at me like, huh? She's like, don't we have to go back now? I think she was just trying to protect me. But all of a sudden, he just looked over to her and she just looked back at him. And it was almost like she was in a daze. She just sat down and said, have a good time. He took my hand and said, come walk with me. We ventured out into the night, walking the streets. He told me he was an ER doctor and that he worked nights, and that he never really was around during the day. This whole time I was so just captured by him. He then leads me into an old cemetery and we walked the graves. I felt almost as if I was in this weird daze or something I can't explain. I slowly came to and I told him I think it's best that we get back to my friend. He just looked at me and I swear for a moment I felt as if I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I felt like forever as I just stared into his eyes. I was about to start crying when he said, of course. He ended up walking me back to my friend and he said goodbye. But as soon as he started walking away, I started to cry. Like that feeling that someone gets when they were just broken up with. I can't explain it. I was missing him terribly. I have never or have seen him again, but I still think of him to this day. Whenever he comes into my head, it's like a piece of me was taken away from him. I seriously can't explain it, but sometimes I feel like I can't live without him. Wherever you are, or whatever you are, come see me. Tall tales tell us of creatures, those that seek victims in the dark, those that return from the dead to feed on our blood. I have what I would like to call a real vampire encounter. At least, I believe it was a vampire. Back in 2006, I was part of the goth scene. Now, I never really true grew out of that. I can tell you that I have lived a life of black magic and messing with things that we shouldn't, just to be more dark, if you will. Our biggest hangout spot was this old cemetery that occupied one of my friend's properties. So we were actually allowed to be there. Now, we weren't dicks or anything. We showed the utmost respect for those that were buried there. One summer night, we're all hanging out. Our friend, who we called Lore, he was short for Lori, but cooler, told us through text that she had met some guy and that she was bringing him. Now, Laura was a lot older than us. She was in her 20s and she was a bringer of alcohol. Back then, she was the coolest person to hang out with. So we're all hanging out at this graveyard when Laura strolls up with her, very dark looking guy. I say dark because he was all in black except this red button up. With spiky blonde hair, he actually reminded me of Spike from Buffy. Go to shake his hand and he reaches and says, "Hello." First and foremost, this guy right away just gave me the chills. I was like, "Hey, I'm Mike. Everyone calls me Dead." And he just laughs and says, "You don't look dead to me." And I think he was just trying to break the ice. And then he says, "I'm Taylor." "Oh," I say. "Hey." I shake his hand. His hand is freaking cold. Like he had been out in cold weather, but this is in the middle of summer. I don't say anything or think anything of it. Throughout the night, we have maybe 3 girls total, including Laura, to the group. All the girls would just hang around this guy, almost as if they were attached to him like magnets. At some point, one of the guy's girlfriends go to grab her. I think that her name was Becky, and she straight up tells him to back off and that she was talking to Taylor. I'm like, what the hell? So I'm just sitting there drinking my beer, talking to my friend Steve. We call him Dead Steve. I'm like, "Yo, Taylor, want a beer?" He just looks at me and says, "Nah, I don't touch this stuff." And goes back talking to the girls. Now, at this point, I'm growing frustrated as they have their own little group going on. The events that took place next is a little adult, so if you're listening, please cover your ears. Taylor literally tells 2 of the girls to start making out. So without hesitation, they do. Now, I don't think anything like this, or they ever thought they were like that at all. Taylor then says, "Good. Now take that knife and cut her arm. Not too deep, just enough to draw blood." Again, the girl does it, what Taylor asks. I swear at this point, they're either drunk, on something, or under some kind of spell. This gets weirder as Taylor grabs one of the girl's arms and starts to suck on the blood that's pouring from her arm. Okay, I'm thinking, I'm into dark stuff and weird, but this is getting freaking way too weird for me. So Carm stands up and says, "Alright, that's enough." What the hell is going on now? Now mind you, Carm isn't a small dude. He was probably 6'5" and 220 pounds. The dude lifted weights like it was his job. Taylor stands up and says, "Calm down, just having fun." The girls at this point are just sitting there looking at the ground in some kind of weird daze. So Carmen tells him, "I think you should leave." Taylor then says, "Chill, buddy." Then sits down and starts talking to the girls again. And Carmen goes back up to him to stand right in front of his face. And Taylor stands right back up and looks directly into his eyes. For a second, Carm just sits there looking into him, and out of nowhere, yells and runs away. I'm not kidding. I'm like, whoa, something isn't right about this guy. So I seriously try to break the ice again. I'm like, "Hey Taylor, I think it's time we leave." Taylor then comes up to me and says, and the next thing that I can only describe was, I had this uneasy feeling, like doom, pending doom, that I was about to die. I was like, "I'm out of here." I have and never will feel that feeling again. I seriously can't explain it. It was animalistic. Like, seriously, I was about to die. Here's the icing on the cake. The girls that were a part of that don't remember anything from that night at all. And Lore claims she doesn't remember the guy at all and that she never met anyone. And that she was at home. Carm, days after dropped out of school. Straight up just dropped out of high school and checked himself into the hospital because he was having constant panic attacks. I haven't spoken to them in many, many years, but the events that happened that night, I can't explain, and whoever that guy was, what that guy was, I will never be able to explain. I truly believe that if vampires exist, this guy was a vampire. Well, all my haunted followers, I hope that you enjoyed those stories. You know, the origins of vampires date back to the early 1700s in Europe, and still to this day there's reported sightings, such as stories that I shared, although they're not as rampant like the sightings in the 17 and the 1800s. There's still sightings. Now, as a paranormal investigator, you have to think outside of the box, yet you still have to think within inside a certain realm, so to speak. And vampires and werewolves, well, they don't fit in any of those realms, which simply makes them, well, defy explanation. You know, as an EMT, I know that when a person stops breathing, this is called cardiac arrest, or when a person passes, ultimately they're coded and they're breathing, they've been pronounced. There's no oxygen being pumped to any of the vital organs, being the brain, being the heart, being the lungs, and we need that to live, basically. And vampires supposedly don't have a heartbeat, they don't have blood pressure. So I think this is in medical terms, this defies that explanation, which I think that makes them truly interesting. You know, there's so many different movies out there too that are based on vampires. Twilight, Underworld, Lost Boys, one of my favorite movies. They're all great movies, and you know, there's even tons of TV shows based on vampires: Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Vampire Diaries. You know, the list goes on. What makes, I think, us fascinated with vampires is the idea of immortality, or the idea that we can control a person. I think that's what makes us interested in vampires. Anyone who wants to live forever or be young forever. I truly believe that everyone in these stories, they experience something. What I don't know, but they're amazing stories, as they were. I want to thank RadDead34 from Reddit, and I also want to thank Billy Moore. The last person wants to remain anonymous, so they're going to remain anonymous. All my haunted followers, if you haven't done so yet, share this story, like and sub to my videos. Next, guys, I'm looking for supposed encounters with urban legends. Be that Mothman, be that Slenderman, whatever. Something that is an urban legend. I want to hear your stories. Share that to alexuni101@gmail.com. And as always, happy hauntings.